Hello and welcome back to our next episode in our TactileView tutorial series here. This time we're going to be talking about our selection tools, and there's kind of two of them. There's one, and these are on the toolbar. This will be right below that picture, import picture icon that we talked about in the last video. We have one that's kind of a black kind of dotted square box icon here, and that one's a select area tool. And below that we have a detect shape tool. So we'll talk about the select area first. So this is kind of, well, it's honestly a lot of different, I guess, Photoshop type programs or image kind of programs have something similar to this. Basically, what you do is if you want to move a chunk or something on your graphic, like I have my rocket ship here, let's say I want to move my porthole window somewhere else. I can just click and drag out a square here. I'm grabbing actually a little bit of the rest of my rocket ship without meaning to, but then I can just click and drag it and I can move this chunk or this porthole wherever I want. And then that's it. So I've selected it and now I can move it around. And that is at its essence, that's the select shape tool. You can just grab chunks of your graphic and move it around. You can also grab one of the purple corners or sides to scale or stretch your graphic if you want to do that to whatever size or anything like that you would like. Now you're going to notice that there's kind of this little yellow box that pops up here. I can kind of click on that and my select kind of tool goes away. And you might have noticed when I selected something earlier that there was a couple different shapes and little squares that popped up. One was blue and one was red, just like I have here. And so you're going to have a couple of these kind of extra little items on your select shape tool, and you might be wondering what are those exactly. And so those are, depending on what you want to do, those can be super helpful. And this is also a really great time to introduce a few different parts of the graphics or different types of drawing elements within TactileView. So there are two kind of different types of drawing elements in TactileView. One would be objects, and the other would be things that are part of the picture or image. And so to kind of illustrate this a little bit, I'm going to go draw out an object real quick. So if I go over my toolbar, I'm going to kind of jump down to my blue icons here, which I have a square that's represented in blue, a circle, triangle, etc. I'll just grab my square and I'm going to draw that out. So anything that you see in blue inside TactileView is going to be an object. So the difference between an object and something that's part of the picture, like you notice my rocket ship is represented in all black, and I can't go click on my rocket ship and drag just chunks of it around without, say, using my selection tool. But something that's blue, which would be an object again, I can just go back and I can click on it at any time. I can grab it, I can move it around, I could grab one of the corners, for example, and resize it, or grab a side and I could stretch it out. I can manipulate this at any time after the fact. I can go work on something else, I can come back to this and be like, oh, you know what, that's a little too big, or I want it over here, or something like that. I can manipulate it basically at any time after the fact. So that would be an object, or that type of drawing element. And then again, there are things that are part of the picture. You might notice that sometimes TactileView, well, not sometimes, all the time, TactileView calls this part of the bitmap. Basically, bitmap is a image-based term. You don't have to worry about so much that what bitmap is exactly, as much as you just want to know that bitmap means part of the picture. So for example, like my porthole that I was talking about earlier that I selected and moved around, this is all part, my porthole or my flames or my wings on my rocket ship I have here are all part of a greater picture, right? And so that's why I can't just go click on my porthole and just drag it around, is because, well, that is part of a picture. And so that's why if I want to move something that is part of a picture, I must use my selection tool. As where my objects are intended to be objects, which I can go back and manipulate after the fact. So you will see those two drawing elements inside TactileView, objects represented in blue and things part of the picture represented in black. And so those are your two drawing elements. And so on your selection tool, you do have, when we draw, I'll just select basically nothing here, but you'll notice on kind of the right edge and bottom edge of my selection kind of box or window that I have a little blue square, and this says move objects only. And so this will allow you to use the selection tool to move objects. And now you might say, well, why would I need to do that? I can go back and grab and move an object all by itself anyway. Well, you may have had kind of maybe like a compound kind of object that you made. So maybe you layered multiple objects on top of each other. Like say you have two squares on there, maybe a circle or something, and they're all just lined up and overlapping in just a certain way to make a certain thing that you want it to. Well, then you might want to move all three of those objects at once, and that's where this kind of comes in. So by default, your selection tool is going to mainly be using for moving parts of the image that are represented in black. But for those type of situations where you have a whole bunch of objects and you want to move them all together as one group, you can use a selection tool and use this little blue square to grab all those together and move them all together. And then you don't really need to use it, but there's also a little red square. And this one, if you hover your mouse over it, will say move or retrieve selected part of the bitmap. Again, just whenever you see bitmap, think part of the picture that is black. And so this one would let you, in my case, pick up part of my rocket ship, or because 99% of the time you're using the selection tool to move parts of the image, not so much the objects, because objects can typically be moved by themselves. You don't even have to click on that. You can just kind of just click and drag anywhere inside the middle of the window and it'll do it for you automatically. Take that chunk of that bitmap out. Now when you've selected something and even you click away from it, it kind of keeps the selection around that chunk that you were moving previously. And so if you want to be able to kind of pick that up again later, you can leave this kind of selection box, which is represented by a little red dashed line around it. You can leave that there and come back and manipulate it later on. So if you think you aren't done adjusting that, there's no harm in leaving it. But if you are done adjusting it and you kind of want that red box to go away so you can see what it's properly supposed to look like, there is a little yellow box. I know it's kind of starting to get a little bit confusing. Once you get used to it, it's really not too bad. There's a little yellow box that if you hover your mouse over, it says fuse with bitmap. Again, I think the term bitmap can be a little bit confusing for folks because especially in the US we don't use that terminology so much, but basically think bitmap equals just part of the picture. So fusing with bitmap means put it back as part of the picture where it's not click and draggable anymore or stretchable. So if I click on that, you see my little red box puts away and the TactileView has kind of meshed that chunk of the graphic that I was moving or manipulating back in with the original graphic. So hopefully that makes sense. Most of the time, again, the selection tool, click and drag over a chunk of the graphic you want to move, and you can move that chunk within your selection tool. But in a pinch, you can use the selection tool with the blue box on the edge to move a group of objects as well. You can also click on the red box to move things that are part of the picture. Again, since the selection tool defaults to moving things that are part of the picture, you don't strictly speaking have to press on the red box, which you can if you want to, and the yellow box is to kind of put chunks of the picture that you've moved or manipulated back in place with the picture as it kind of originally was. Hopefully that makes sense. That's a little confusing, but hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Okay, one more tool in this video, because these are kind of sort of, I feel like there's some overlap here anyway, is a detect shape tool. So this one is below that selection tool. It's kind of represented by a little bit of a red dashed line around kind of something in the middle, and it's called detect shape tool. So what this tool does is you just simply, when you choose it, you will click inside of an area of your picture that you want to maybe add a fill to, for example. That's where I find this most useful. And it will automatically detect the shape or the edge of whatever it is that kind of enclosed area that you clicked inside of. So for example, maybe I would like to add a texture fill to the body of my rocket ship here, or maybe we'll do one of the wings actually. We'll say I want my wings to be textured something. So I will grab my detect shape tool and I will click inside one of the wings on my rocket ship. And when I do, there's a little kind of like whoosh noise you might have heard, and it outlines the inside of my wing there. And then I can go through and I can add pattern fills, texture fills, add a color fill even if I wanted to. For certain bossers that do the multiple dot heights with depending on the color, that could be useful. But basically I have detected this area, or they call it detecting shape, but I've detected that area, and now I can add a fill or something like that. Now we're going to talk about fills in a little bit more in depth, but just to show you what that might look like, I'm just going to do it really quickly, and again I will elaborate on this later on in more detail. So I'm just doing one for fun here and adding it, and there we go. Now I chose a mirrored half circle pattern, or some people call it texture fill, for one of the wings, and I could go do my other wing now if I wanted to. And that looks wonderful. And so okay, with that, that is our detect shape tool. Again, it's meant for outlining, or you could even, I guess you could clone shapes with this if you wanted to. But the thing I probably use the detect shape tool for the most is selecting the inside area of something, so I can add a fill or color fill or something, or pattern or texture fill to that item. Now, actually, one quick last mention, just because this is important and it probably will accidentally happen to you if I don't say it, is that if the area which you click with this detect shape tool is not enclosed, it will kind of escape, if you will. So let me kind of show you what I'm talking about. So right now I'll work on the other wing on my rocket ship here. We have this kind of inner part of this wing, and it is enclosed, meaning there's no gaps in any of the edges. So if I were to go click my detect shape tool in there, it will select that whole area, no problem. Okay, now I'm gonna hit my little cancel button and delete that because I actually don't want it. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my eraser and I'm gonna make a gap in that wing there. So I'm gonna kind of erase a little chunk. And now I'm gonna go back and grab my detect shape tool again, and I'm gonna click it again. And now you might realize that it basically just detected the entire outline of the entire inner kind of edge of my rocket ship. And that's because it escaped my wing because there was a hole in my wing, right? Now again, I'm gonna go ahead and delete this because we don't want it actually to do that. So you do have to be a little wary there when you're detecting something to add a fill or texture to, or using that detect shape tool for anything really. Make sure that is enclosed, because if you're not clicking in an enclosed area, it will think you're also trying to select anything out of that area as well. So just a little kind of word to the wise there. Okay, that is our detect shape tool, and it can be useful for a whole bunch of stuff, especially adding fills to any part of your graphic that you want. All right, we'll wrap up this episode right there, and we'll continue on in the next one.